Righty, everybody. Hey, we are here, and you can see we're retired in Korea. We're going to talk about the won rate dropping, Japanese collaborators. Yes, if you thought it, that wasn't over, it's not. Real estate tax debacle and female inmate pen pal controversy here in Korea. Yes, today is going to be an interesting show. So let's go ahead and we'll drop the music down just a tad. We'll put it down to 10 so that we got a little bit of background music there. Hey everybody, Steve here, the retired hobby tech guy, American expat living here in Korea. And so what we're doing is we're going over and we are pointing out the things that are going on here in Korea to keep you in the know, because where you live, you should know what's going on where you live. Yeah, it's kind of a thing. So anyway, what we're ended up doing is kind of talking about some stuff. We're drinking some coffee. Actually, it's a latte. It's a macadamia nut praline Hawaiian blend that we got from Oahu, and with a little bit of vanilla syrup in there, and ooh, it is rocking. So anyway, today's episode, Retired in Korea, we're going to go over some information. One of the big things that kind of popped up recently, a lot of foreigners have been coming over to Korea because the exchange rate was really good. You could get a lot of won for the US dollar and some other currencies, but for the US dollar, a lot of American foreigners have been coming over and taking advantage of that. And even people like myself, to where we experienced the high exchange rates, benefited us because we saved thousands and thousands of dollars in buying things because the exchange rate was so beneficial to us. Because we had US dollars, we exchanged it, to like 1,500, over 1,500 won to the dollar, almost 1,600 won to the dollar. And then we were able to recently buy an apartment, an investment property. Exchange rates were pretty high, so in that amount of money, we saved a significant amount. So yeah, George pops in and says, "Howdy, hello, welcome to the stream, welcome back." So yeah, the exchange rate has been really, really good, and a number of people have contacted me and have come over here and retired like we did, like the wife and I did, and then other people are still considering this, and yeah. This is a question that the won rate comes into play. So currently what we're looking at now is about, let me fix this a little bit. So that way my face isn't so small, so I can kind of see what I'm doing here. The won rate falls below 1,400 for the first time in 11 months. This is really big because I think it was like 1397. Yeah, 1397 exchange rate. And so that went down when normally, well, I don't know if there's a thing such as normally anymore in the world today, but usually in the recent past, it's been around the 1,400 mark. And it even got so bad where it was about 1,600 won to the dollar. Now, normally, I would say the exchange rate should be somewhere around 1,200 won per dollar, but we've got a lot of things going on here in Korea. We have the war in Ukraine, which is affecting everybody still. That thing is still going on. I don't think that's gonna end anytime soon. I think Russia's just gonna keep popping at it, and Ukraine is going to keep using their drones. They're going to keep going after refineries, infrastructure in Russia, and it's just going to drag that conflict out for, I think it's going to be for a few more years. It's getting to the point of where Russia is starting to conscript North Korean soldiers. They're supposed to get like another 30 or 40,000 to come and fight the war in Ukraine, which is just a meat grinder for those people. Terry pops in and says, "Hello, hey, welcome back to the stream there, Terry. Good to see you. Got your email answered." But yeah, it is getting really interesting. So while the won rate goes up and down, we're seeing a downward tick. It'll probably go back up. I don't know. It's kind of like a cycle. You know, things go down, they go up, they go up, they go down. And you know, for the people that are moving over here, that might make the difference between deciding on when to buy an apartment or to hold off and just rent, depending on the exchange rate. Because with the exchange rate here in Korea, you're probably going to have to transfer some money to a Korean bank, or you're going to have access to a bank that's here in Korea and then exchange that for US dollars into Korean won. A lot of people ask me the question, well, don't Korean banks have good exchange rates? Which bank, Korean bank, has the best exchange rate? Honestly, don't go to Korean banks for exchange rates. They are the worst. What you want to do, and even with the US banks that are in Korea, their exchange rates are not good either. So what you'll want to do is get US dollars, and then you'll take that to a money exchange store, and you'll get probably the best exchange rate that you can get. And the more the better. And you can also talk to the money exchange store, especially in large amounts. You can kind of haggle a little bit and get a little bit of a better exchange rate depending on the amount. And then also, if you have $100 bills, you know, you can try to get a better exchange rate than that, because $100 bills are great to have, and money exchange stores really like those. We got Sparky Asia. Hey, welcome back to the stream. We also have Ned Bennett here. Good day, all. Yes, and to you as well. So, the best place to get exchange is at money exchange stores. You'll get a better exchange rate there. And again, the more money you exchange in $100 bills, you can talk to the money exchange stores and try to squeak out 1 or 2 won more in your favor. But yeah, it's if you rely on the banks, you're going to be leaving money on the table. But as it is now, where it's down to basically 1,400 won per dollar, 13.97 is what it was yesterday or the day before, you're going to be losing some money. So if you're coming over here to retire and you're thinking about buying property, buying an apartment, a house, whatever it is, villa, you might want to wait a little bit, do some renting until the exchange rate goes up, and you can get more bang for your buck if you're using US dollars, or not. You know, it kind of depends. But when you're talking about something, you know, you're talking about properties that are $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000. That exchange rate and the difference between, say, 1,400 and 1,450 or 1,500 won per dollar really gets significant when you get into those higher amounts. So I know a bunch of people have asked me about that. And yeah, there are some people that got here that saw my videos or our videos. My wife and I came over here to Korea and retire, and just hit the timing perfect to get that high exchange rate. Kind of like what we did when we got here and we purchased our apartment. So yeah, and also with our investment property over in Asan Technical Valley, we were pretty much at the height of the exchange rate. So that worked out well for us. It was just like everything, the stars aligned and everything was good. So yeah, the water rate is going up. We got that. For those people here in Korea, the other interesting thing is that living in a different country, you're going to have different rules. You're going to have different laws. The government, while it is kind of a republic, basically, you still have the left and the right, you know, the conservatives and the liberals and people in between and all of that stuff. But then you do have different things that the government does that we don't do in the United States. You know, so for example, in the United States, if the government just kind of popped up and said, hey, you've got this private business or, you know, private bank or whatever it is, whatever businesses you have, and they say, you know what, we're going to move you. We're going to move your entire sector. And we're going to move it out of, let's say, Austin, Texas. You know, Austin is big, bad. It's moving hard and heavy, and everybody wants to be there. And then what happens if the Texas government says, you know what, all the finance sector, we're going to move you, you know, 300 miles away in some little podunk area because we want to build up other parts of Texas. there'd be a lot of people that would be mad on that. For the government to step in and tell you and tell a private business, you got to move. That's the law. And the employees would then have to move if they want to keep their jobs. So where does that leave you? Holy crow, that's kind of an interesting little dilemma, because now you work in an area, in a sector, and you have a home, your kids are in good schools, the whole 9 yards. And then now suddenly the government steps in and says, yeah, we're moving your entire sector, 50 or 300 miles out this way. And yeah. And so now you have to sell your house, keep your house. You got to pull your kids out of schools that are, you're in a better school district than the place that the government told you to go to. That would get under the skin of a lot of people. And unfortunately, that's what's looking, that might happen here in Korea. So let's just jump into this. We'll look into this. Financial regulators' potential Sejong relocation stirs unease amongst employees. And yeah, there they are. Members of the Korean Financial Industry Union, major umbrella of labor organization, is holding a press conference, and the government's move to relocate state-run financial institutions out of Seoul. Yeah, it's state-run. So my apologies for saying it was private, but it's state-run financial institutions. They're going to relocate them out of Seoul. Now, the whole reason behind this is that the current administration and other people have seen that everything revolves around Seoul. And so hospitals, businesses, financial sectors, commerce, the whole 9 yards, all of these things are centered around Seoul or very big cities. And so that leaves a lot of the other areas, there's not a lot of growth. And so, yeah, the country is declining. Not only are we in kind of like an economic slump, but now it's kind of pulled out because of this whole AI, Samsung, SK Hynix, thing going on. But the government wants to spread the wealth. So they want to take the financial institutions, they want to move them to Sejong, out of Seoul, and move them there. They also want to move some other industries out of Seoul and put down in Busan on the southern tip of Korea. And so now there's this upheaval. It almost reminds me of the military. In the military, you're there and you serve at the behest of the government, and then the government sends you where it needs you. This is different because the state-run organizations and institutions and sectors have been normally around Seoul, and now they're being told, hey, you need to pack up and go, and if you don't pack up and go, you're going to lose your job. Talk about upheaval. That is absolutely crazy. And the interesting thing here in Korea is that the majority of people want to go to Seoul because Seoul is the epitome of success. If you can live in a very nice district in Seoul, you have, you've gone to school, you got the good job, you move to Seoul, you get a good apartment. That is kind of like the American dream in the United States. It's the Korean dream here. And so everybody wants to go to Seoul. So now you've reached this level of success and status, and you are indeed living in Seoul. You're working in the banking industry, finances, the whole 9 yards. Kids are going to school. Oh, it's great. It's awesome. I have all this. And now you're being told, hey, pack your shit and go down here. And you're like, yuck. It's almost, some Koreans almost feel like they're being punished for being successful in doing what they were told to do, because the new thing that the government's trying to do is say, hey, we're gonna spread the wealth around. We want to have different sectors in Korea that will experience growth that will help the country overall, instead of just isolating everything in Seoul, which kind of makes sense. I can see that, but you still have to come to a place of where it's going to be a massive inconvenience, and it's, is it too far overreaching for the government to just say, you need to move or else? it is what it is. Well, the labor unions are popping into play and all this stuff. George says, is this going to affect your new property? No, it will not. Uh, we're talking about banking and finance centers. We're talking about shipping and business and the big boy economic players and sectors having to go to different parts of the country. For me, in the investment property that we just bought, an apartment in Asan Technical Valley, I don't have to worry about that because it's in a real good rental area on a couple of factors. The first factor is that you have the local military base, Camp Humphreys, and that provides a lot of renters. There's a huge supply of people that need to live and they have to live off post. And there's a deal between Korea and the United States that says, military bases can only supply so much on post housing, and then you have to have X amount of housing off post so that Korea can, make some money out of this deal. So it's a win-win situation. So the other reason that the apartment that we bought as an investment property is that it's still going to be a good deal and it's not going to have problems because of this moving of financial sectors to different areas of Korea, is because, what was it? One was military. Two is because it's close to Godok. It's a little bit of a travel, but Godok is like the city that Samsung built. There is a massive, monumentally massive manufacturing facility that's put up, and it basically put Godok on. It basically built the city. But the problem is the city's really expensive. The apartments, everything is really expensive. So you're going to have people that are wanting to work in Godok at Samsung, but they don't like the high prices of the apartments and everything else. And so they're willing to commute. So in Asan Technical Valley, you've got really nice apartments, great walkability, and people are willing to go get cheaper housing, and then they don't mind the commute. So you're still going to have a high you're still going to have a high rent rate, combined with the fact that a lot of the rent is now turning from the Jeonsei and Wolsei rental things that they do and more into a monthly rent here in Korea. So I kind of pegged that as something that was going to happen a while ago, and lo and behold, that's what is happening. So just keeping our nose to the ground. Let's get to some comments. So yeah, George asks, is that going to affect our property? No, probably not. Dina, welcome to the show. Yes, witnessed and experienced this. Look at Itaewon. It is a ghost city and looks like the slums in DC. Government tried to build up. Let me get you back up there. Build up Songdo. Sai. So much has changed in my 25 plus years. Yeah, Itaewon used to be, but then again, there were some other weird things with Itaewon. Itaewon used to be the place because you had Yongsan military base. So USFK, or United States Forces Korea, was there. United Nations was there. It was the hub, the command hub for U.S. forces and the UN and other militaries in Korea. Itaewon was a huge shopping district, bar district, the whole nine yards. It was really, really there. And then, like Dina says, it's changed a lot. When Yongsan left, everything kind of, it went down. So could we see that with the Korean government telling the banking and financial sector, hey, you're going to go to Sejong, and will we see that same type of depression hit in certain parts of Seoul? That is absolutely true. You're going to have more properties, but then again, I think properties might take a little bit of a dip. But since property prices in Seoul are generally high anyway, I don't think it'll be that big of a problem. Because there's way more demand than supply. And especially with the local real estate laws that the current president, President Lee, has put into play. And he's made some people mad. His approval rating has shot down a lot. So he's trying to tap dance over that. But we could see something similar to that. With that being said, if the government does decide to move the financial sector to Sejong and other places down to Busan, places that have been going down economically, this will bring them back up economically. And we see this similar type of thing done in China. China has financial districts that are strategically located to better serve the entire country. And yeah, you had to move a company from here to there and say, hey, this is where the hub of all our textiles, this is going to be the hub for all our appliances, this is going to be the hub for this and that and whatever. And so while it will be an uncomfortable move, now China has become an industrial powerhouse. And yeah, it's going to be kind of interesting to see how that works out. Terry says, I wonder how that will affect Godok with the big Samsung plant. Will more factories move to Godok? No, I don't think so. I mean, there are the small factories that kind of piggyback off of the bigger companies, and we do see some of that in Godok. But really, for the most part, that's due to capitalism. That's due to free market, and that big giant company comes, more small companies come, they provide more jobs. They want to be closer to, Samsung, that they can provide goods and services to Samsung and vice versa, or whatever. So yeah, we see more, not big factories, but you see more businesses in Godok. But really, for the most part, Samsung is the big boy on the block. And yeah, it's just because of Samsung. I think the other businesses and companies that show up there are just kind of after effects of that. It's not like a planned, organized, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to move, and strategically, whatever. I think it's just people are taking advantage of that. Once Samsung dug their heels in and said, this is what we're going to do. And they made a good financial choice. So, hey, we got John is here in the stream. John, morning. Yes, it is morning here in Korea. Yeah, matter of fact, it's about 12 after 8. George says, wonder if it will affect your taxes. Currently, no. But this will be interesting because this will be the first year that we have an investment property with Korean income. So we're still searching for a tax person that does Korean and US taxes. But as it looks like right now, from the research that I've done, it looks like we're right on the edge of whether we have to pay a little bit of tax or not here in Korea. And again, there's a tax treaty between Korea and the United States. So if I get taxed in Korea, that will be kind of handed over as a tax credit on my US taxes. So I don't experience that double taxation and vice versa. So, and then the good thing is I'm hoping the current administration in the United States has said, I'm not going to hold my breath, that people that $150,000 or less won't experience any tax, that they won't have to pay taxes, which would be great, but I'm not going to hold my breath on it. Kind of similar to, oh, look at all the money we saved with Doge and the Department of, with Elon Musk and cutting and saving money and finding, corruption and all that, that you're going to get a Doge check for all the savings. Well, where's that? I'm not holding my breath on that one there. I highly doubt that will happen. I know a lot of people are like, oh, look how great, we're going to get a refund check, for the Doge and all that. And it's like, how often do you actually see anything like that happening? Whether it's a Republican or Democrats or somewhere in between, yeah, it's barely anything. So yeah, I don't think that'll actually happen. As far as the taxes for, that we're going to have to pay, we're right on the edge whether we're going to pay a little or not at all. We'll see what happens. So George says, so basically it's managed growth. Yeah, that's what Korea is, and the current administration wants to do, is kind of manage the growth, try to revitalize other parts of Korea to make them, different hubs with different sectors and so on and so forth. And supposedly that will help from what we see in other countries. That can help, but is it going to help as much as the government says it will? I don't know. It used to be back in the day with the Industrial Revolution and everything that we saw in the United States and other countries, is that you would have, businesses would all kind of come together in one area because it's easier to do business. here's the plans for this. Somebody had to physically take schematics and blueprints and plans and go over and meet somebody and show them the plans and have meetings and all that. Now we have email, we have, you got Zoom meetings, you could be on the other side of the planet and do the exact same thing with the convenience of, the interwebs. So I think it's more of a managed growth thing that the current administration wants to do. Terry says the financial sector here is changing too with the Texas stock market opening last month. Yes, I know. But that's not because the United States is moving sectors around to promote growth overall in the United States. It's there's there's poor financial decisions and laws made in New York with the New York Stock Exchange, and tons of companies are leaving. Same thing like in Silicon Valley and California. Other financial districts in California, people are basically in big businesses are like, screw this, we're being overtaxed. Let's move to some place that is less oppressive. Um, yeah, so, but I kind of see where, yeah, there is that change. Is the end result is change is happening, and some of these financial sectors are moving to get treated better, and which is going to do basically the same thing. Is you're going to build up parts of the country that are more favorable for big business and financial institutions and so on and so forth. So yeah, I totally agree with that. John K gives Terry the peace sign. Peace. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting thing to see where this goes. Let's get back to the article because we started ranting a little bit here. So this whole thing talks about the growing number of workers are uneasy about the government's move to relocate financial institutions out of Seoul, with the list of affected organizations expected to be made public early next week. So yeah, this will be interesting. Um, feel like it's finally happening. There have been talks about relocation before, usually around elections, but this time the government seems serious. It's not just having to move our homes. We're also concerned that relocation could affect the efficiency of our work since we have to communicate frequently with businesses based in Seoul. And again, I think this is kind of a little misnomer here. I think this is much ado about nothing because we have the internet, we have Zoom meetings, you can do absolutely everything that you can do in Korea, or not in Korea, but online and with FaceTime and this whole thing. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it's more of an inconvenience for the people. And I think there will be, of course, there'll be some interruption in service through this transition period where this will be be a variable and people will be affected by it. But I don't think it's. I mean, seriously, the efficiency of our work. I can send a text and email and do a Zoom meeting like that. Whereas if you had a financial, let's say you had a financial company and a big business, and then they both of them have to drive either to each other's place or to a common meeting place. You got to take time to drive and all that. When Zoom meeting and things like that could be done almost instantaneously. So saving time. So I don't understand how efficiency and communication would be affected by this move. I don't know. I'm not a big business or economy guy. I'm just an old retired military dude who's got a little bit of common sense, a little bit. An official at the Financial Services Commission spoke on anonymity, saying that the relocation appeared to be a done deal. I've seen some other articles from other people saying that, yeah, this is going to be the way it's going to be done. People are saying, hey, I got to come to terms and figure out what to do with my family, whether we should get a new apartment. So with that, you're going to have a ton of people that are going to, and this is all going to come into play here. What happened to where's my, boom, there we go. Holy crap. I'm just hitting random buttons on the page and stuff is happening. But this is kind of interesting because, it talks about this guy says, should we find a new apartment? Well, this means that apartment prices and land and real estate is going to go up in Sejong like that. It probably already is. And there's probably people that have already bought land and properties because they knew of this beforehand. Politicians and their family members, governors, you only have friends and family, are privy to such information that other civilians are not, kind of like what we see in the United States. Um, but the financial super variable will likely be among the institutions considered for relocation, so finance. Uh, State-run banks are being linked to separate moves, with Korea Development Bank and Export-Import Bank of Korea potentially heading for Busan and the Industrial Bank of Korea to Daegu. Holy crow, Daegu? Daegu? Daegu. I'm so old. I remember when Daegu was called Daegu. Just a hard D, Daegu. Daegu. Um, Daegu, in case you didn't know, is like the hottest place in Korea. So if you want to experience the burning fires of hell during the hot and humid Korean summers, go to Daegu. It's miserable there. I mean, it's miserable in Korea, but Daegu has a special type of heat misery when it comes to that. The relocation is part of Lee Jae-myung's administration's broader push to move public institutions outside of the capital and ease the country's heavy concentration around Seoul. But for many employees in these institutions, concerns go beyond inconvenience of moving their homes. They also worry about moving out of Seoul could make their day-to-day work more difficult. How could your day-to-day work be more difficult? I, I, let's say you work in some business. You have an office in Seoul. You go to that business, you go in your office, you do your work, and your day-to-day work, you do your day-to-day work. So if say your business or sector has to go to Sejong, which is a fair distance away, you're going to have a building that you're going to go to work at. you're going to have an office, and you're going to do your day-to-day work. And granted, there'll be a little bit of a transition period speed bump thing that we'll have, but then you'll get into doing normal day-to-day work. It's just a little, you need to acclimatize to the new location that you're in. But really, you're going to be sending emails, you're going to be doing phone calls, you're going to be doing FaceTime and Zoom calls and so on and so forth. So, is it really, really going to make your day-to-day work much more difficult? I don't know. Major financial institutions, as banks and brokerages, are concentrated in Seoul, where regulators need to maintain close contact with them and other key market institutions on issues requiring a quick response. Maybe back in the day, but we're in 2026. Like I said, FaceTime, all of this stuff. I think they're making a lot out of this when it really isn't. The main concern, FSS, which employs large numbers of lawyers, accountants, and specialists, employees and union officials fear that a move to Sejong could accelerate a loss of experienced professionals. Because basically what they're saying is you're going to have a bunch of people that are going to be pissed off about moving out of Seoul and say, screw it, I'm done. And they're going to quit or move on, and then they're going to lose these experienced professionals. FSS labor union has said, yeah, we're against this totally. We're deeply concerned that the government's push to relocate public financial institutions could end up moving the financial watchdog away from the front lines of supervision. And again, it's 2026. I don't know. It just means that you'll have to put some of the financial, watchdogs in Sejong as well. So again, you're going to have to move some more people because this is what the government wants to do. Now, are these watchdogs, financial watchdogs, are they going to be, oh, yay, I get to leave Seoul and go to Sejong? Probably not many of them. Some of them might, some of them would like, hey, I'm tired of the city life. I want to get away. But you see how this could be a problem? Labor unions and state-run banks are also preparing for collective action. The Nationwide Financial Industry Workers Union formed a joint task force representing 14 financial institutions preparing for rallies and strikes over the relocation push. In a vote held last week, 96.1% of union members backed the planned general strike. Union plans to hold a rally in Udo on August 28th and a general strike on September 4th. So yeah, things are going to get interesting here. Yeah, they delivered letters of protest. So this whole thing with moving financial sectors, I can see both sides of the coin. I can see where the government says, hey, you're going to move here, you're going to move here, and you're going to move here. And the people in the middle, the employees, are going to be like, well, crap, I don't want to leave Seoul. I don't want to pull my kids out of great schools and maybe have to go to a lesser school, less status and so on and so forth. But on the other end of the spectrum, I see how making different parts of the country be hubs for certain sectors could help the country grow overall. So let's say you take the finance and you move them to some part of the country. You're going to kind of boost up, property prices are going to go up, you're going to have more employees, more people, more population. It's going to result in more businesses, better schools. You're going to get better hospitals and medical health care. So this really could spur on a big boom, not just for the business sector, but also for individual people, the citizens, because you're going to get better schools, property is going to go up, which could be, I don't know, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. It's going to be both. Better schools, better hospitals, better medical care, so on and so forth, kind of like what we saw with Samsung when they basically built Godok City, which is huge. It is monumental, but it's so nice. So this could be a revamping, and it could be a good thing, but it's definitely going to be some speed bumps down the road. Terry says that Samsung is moving their headquarters to Texas. Oh, that must be their Samsung stateside office. Yeah, so many businesses are leaving California and New York. It is insane. Same thing in Washington State and other companies that are just being taxed, I'd say punitively taxed, are finally saying, you know what, we're out of here. If you don't appreciate us and throw us a bone when we bring, sometimes tens of thousands of jobs and untold millions and billions in tax revenue, yeah, when the taxing becomes punitive, or it is so hard to do business because of the rules and laws that are in place there, businesses are going to go find a place where it's more beneficial to them. And it's more beneficial to them, and wherever they move to, it's going to be more beneficial for that area of the country. So yeah. Yeah, some good stuff here. Good stuff here. This is kind of interesting. The next part we're going to talk about Japanese collaborators. Yes, collaborators. We're going to collaborate. And it's not like YouTube influencer collaboration that we're talking about here. No. It's not like J-pop, K-pop come together and have a child. We're going to have this awesome, festival going on. No, we're talking about when Japan ruled Korea and did a lot of horrible things, and then you had Koreans who were collaborating with the Japanese as they occupied Korea and did a lot of horrible things, and that's the collaborators we're talking about. And that was a while ago, Korean War, but this is interesting. So let's just go ahead and jump into this. I was surprised that this was going to be a thing. Korea launches hunt for assets accumulated by pro-Japanese collaborators. Ooh. So basically, if you're a collaborator, you're a Korean and you collaborated with the Japanese colonial forces that did bad things while they're here in Korea, and the transfer of wealth from other Koreans that were non-collaborators to the collaborators that supported the sometimes horrific Japanese occupation of Korea, yeah, that there might be a change. Somebody might have their pocketbooks significantly lightened. Outcry over actor Ha Young's family history prompts young Koreans to examine their own lineage. 16 years winding down, Korea's investigative commission on pro-Japanese collaborators' property, I didn't really know this was a thing until recently, will restart operations this December to examine and seize assets illegally amassed during Japan's occupation of Korea. So if your great great grandfather or great 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 grandfather or family members got land and money and all those things from Japan because they collaborated with the Japanese during the time in which Japan did a lot of horrible things. I just can't understate that enough. Those assets could be seized. Holy crow. Oh, it almost reminds me of like World War II and how, Germany and they, with the Jews and the Holocaust and all the other minorities that were deemed, bad, and they confiscated all of their wealth. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church that took a lot of that gold from and said property and monies and very expensive things, and then also was paid by the Germans to get them out of Germany and parts of Europe to other places in the world, like Argentina, and they made a ton of money off of that. But no, we won't talk about it. Anyway, it's kind of similar to that, except Korea is actually going after these ill-gained assets. Sorry, I digressed there. The Commission's reactivation follows the scheduled enforcement of the pro-Japanese and anti-national collaborators to the state on December 3rd. The law targets the wealth and property of accumulated through the cooperation of Japanese imperial forces during the 1910 to 1945 colonial period. And again, if you look at it, yeah, that wasn't too long ago. Some of my wife's family still was alive during that time. Holy crow. Korea's renewed asset search is underscored by stark, enduring socioeconomic divide. Study shows nearly 3/4 of the descendants of independence activists live on low-income households, with many relying on state welfare, giving painful weight to the adage that 3 generations are ruined by fighting for independence, while 3 generations prosper through collaboration. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting little thing there. Yeah. Hey, we got Swedish Forge to join. Hello, sir. Good to see you back again. So yeah, this is a really interesting thing. The special legislation was enacted to address a legal void after the first commission was disbanded in 2010, just 4 years, leaving the nation without a formal investigative body to trace illicit, undisclosed assets through collaboration. So yeah, to prevent attempts to hide wealth, the new law explicitly allows government to claw back proceeds even if the descendants of collaborators have already sold off the property. Well, they did profit from ill-gotten gain. And if you sold it and made money, I guess you... Yeah, this is going to be wild. This is going to be wild because now, let's just get back to this. This is going to be wild because now there is such an upheaval here that Koreans they're searching to find out the history of their families like nobody's business. And besides, going back and say, oh, my family was, was philosophers and military generals and this and educators and blah, and pillars of commerce. Now people are looking at their Korean history to see, did great-grandpa or great-great-grandfather or anybody in our family, were they Japanese collaborators? It is a huge thing. And the fallout is crazy. So now you have people that are trying to find other people's histories to find out if their family tree had Japanese collaborators. And now you have the online bullying, you have all this, people are possibly going to lose jobs, and we're going to see this in the entertainment sector where this comes into play. But the act also introduces monetary reward provisions for citizens who identify and report hidden collaborator assets. Ooh. According to the Ministry of Justice records and official white papers, the original commission designated 2,359 parcels of land owned by 168 collaborators for state confiscation during its 4-year run. That's the first time. It also issued official rulings against 24 descendants who had already disposed of property through sales to third parties. Hmm. The total assets recovered by the state through the first commission during that 4 years was valued at $175 million at the time. But, that was a ways back. And if you look at the appreciation of property and so on and so forth, today that would be huge. Um, uh, John, John K says, can you share that link? Absolutely. Let me go ahead. And Collaborators link. And boom, there it is for you. Preparations began in June. 11-member team. Team is establishing relevant regulations and strategic investment plans ahead of the December launch. So this is going to pop up in December, but it's already causing waves here in Korea because people are looking not only at their history, but the history of their friends, coworkers, and so on and so forth. And it is really a point of contention. Yeah. The legislative milestone comes amid a broader cultural shift in Korea where younger citizens, particularly those in their 20s and 30s, are increasingly tracing their lineage and scrutinizing family histories. Trends has intensified around the Liberation Day, which is kind of like our 4th of July, to verify whether their ancestors were, pro-Korea or pro-Japanese. The surge in interest was sparked in a recent public controversies involving actor Ha Young, real name An Ha Young. She's in the entertainment industry here in Korea. After she said she came from a family with a working history of medicine, praised her great-great-grandfather, An Sung-ho, and online critics subsequently identified him as a doctor linked to Japanese colonial government. It would kind of be like somebody who was in World War II, who was Jewish and was a doctor, and I don't know, helped Goebbels and Goering and Hitler. It's not looking good. It is not looking good. But her father was a doctor, and they had a lot of doctors in her family. But should she be punished for the actions of a great-great-grandfather, whom she probably never met, or if she did meet, she was probably really, really young. And it's not like, you see what I'm saying? It's kind of this odd thing, but there were, things were taken, So since the controversy, online traffic for genealogical and historical research has spiked. Finding your roots. Neighbor Data Lab revealed on Thursday for volume search for finding ancestors surged 50-fold, while genealogy more than doubled. So yeah, this is going to be interesting to see who's using this. And there's going to be some people that don't want to search and find out because it could be detrimental to their jobs and what they do, and or what happened. And it's mostly the people who acquired wealth during that time of 1910 to 1945, during Japanese rule. So yeah, this is going to be really, really interesting. Legal scholars maintain that the special act is grounded directly in constitutional principles aimed at rectifying historical disorientations rather than imposing arbitrary retroactive punishment. And here's the thing that's different with this than what we end up seeing with kind of like slavery in the United States. I know slavery in the United States and reparations is a big thing. Let me get comfortable here. My shoulder and arm still hurts, so I got to move around. So anyway, it ends up that unlike slavery in the United States, where the majority of people in the United States that were American citizens at the time, at the height of slavery, didn't own slaves. Only about, was it 1.7% or 2% of people in the United States owned slaves in the South during the height of slavery in the United States. And again, that was like 400 years ago. We don't have any people living. And according to law, you know, it would be something if a wrong was done, a crime was committed, and somebody illegally profited from a person being a slave who is still alive now. They could say, hey, kind of like being unlawfully imprisoned, but after you're dead, you're pretty much, you don't have a leg to stand on. There might be some possibility, but there's a statute of limitations comes into play. So the whole thing about reparations in the United States, it doesn't really make sense because the majority of people in the United States didn't support slavery or own slaves. I know this is going to be a hot topic. I'm sorry. And I'm not right or left. I'm independent. But in my family, for my case, why should I pay reparations when my family were Northerners and we had family that fought to free the slaves? Just common sense. And then you actually have African Americans way back in the day that owned slaves in the United States during that time. So are they going to have to pay for reparations? And then what about the Africans that captured other Africans and sold them into the slave trade? You see what a tangled web we weave. And then the other obvious fact is yeah, I have some Irish in me. I have German Irish, but the Irish were slaves for the longest time. Pretty much every ethnic group on the planet were slaves to somebody else at one time or another. So really, I don't see how reparations is going to make anything right. Chinese were slaves, Japanese were slaves. We actually interned Japanese in slave camps in the United States during World War II. You had Chinese that were sold as slaves in the United States to help build the railroads. I don't know. I just don't see reparations since we're so far removed. It's kind of like saying, oh, we need to give the land back to the Indians because the white man stole it. And it's like, well, when the Indians had it, they stole land from other Indians. So who does the land originate? You see what I'm saying? It's just kind of this weird thing. But with this, the main difference is a lot of these people are alive. And if you can show directly that because of the collaboration with the Japanese when they ruled Korea harshly and did many horrible things, I can't understate that enough, it puts Hitler to shame. If you look at some of the stuff that happened here in Korea under Japanese rule, holy crow. It's like Hitler needed to take lessons from the Japanese. There's some horrible, horrible things that were done. But I digress. But here we can show direct asset and properties and monies were seized from Koreans that went to Koreans who collaborated with the Japanese who were given special, if you help us, screw over your fellow people, you're going to get some land, some property, some money, and so on and so forth. If those things can absolutely be proven and those people are still alive, or, and laws are a little bit different here in Korea than they are in the United States, and of course, everywhere. But I mean, this is huge. This could be huge. This is crazy. This is crazy. And so since I like history and things like that, I definitely want to keep an eye on this here. Terry says, California says they're going to pay reparation to descendants of slaves, but California never had slaves. Yeah, I know. California was never, they weren't even around during slavery. Anywho, John says, California's, yeah, they have so many problems. I'm not even going to get into that. So anyway, as December enforcement date approaches, public support for the measure remains firm. So there's a lot of Koreans that are like, yes, we need to, get this thing all sorted out. because like under Japanese rule, there was the comfort women here in Korea that were basically the Japanese took Korean women and made them ex-slaves here in Korea for their military. And yeah, that was like pretty bad, pretty bad. So yeah, and that is still going on. You know, there's not too many of them left, unfortunately. But I don't think Japan has ever said, hey, we're sorry, our bad, we apologize. It's totally wrong what happened back then. We want to make things right. I don't think that's happened. Correct me if I'm wrong. Just put it in the comments section. So yeah, this will be really interesting to see this confiscation of wealth for the Japanese occupation of Korea and the collaborators who, you know, kind of palled up to the Japanese of the day and probably turned in and did bad things to their fellow Koreans and got that property or assets and so on and so forth for doing those bad things. Yeah, it's very interesting. George says, and the history of Korea is amazing and scary at the same time. Pretty much every country's history is amazing and scary. Pinchy99, welcome to the show. Says California proposed, but it was vetoed. Okay, good. I didn't know that. Thank you for filling us in on that. That is good to know. My grandma used to tell me stories about Japan taking over Korea. It made me angry as a kid and still feel that way today. Yes, it is very, it is crazy. And here's the sad thing. The sad thing is I would say almost all of the schools in Japan don't talk about it. They don't talk about what the Japanese back then did to the Koreans. Holy crow. It is atrocious, the things that they did to the Korean people, not only for the ex-slave thing that they did with the comfort women, for their military, but they actually tortured medical experiments that were not medical experiments, they were just torture. It was just straight up horrendous stuff that would make Hitler and Goerings and Goebbels just kind of blush and say, damn, you guys are off the chain. Yeah, crazy. And matter of fact, in case you didn't know, the Koreans were actually tattooed similar to the way minorities were by Germany in World War II. They were identified, and there's some people that I've seen with tattoos from the Japanese, and it's absolutely crazy, insane. So yeah, pretty bad. George says, well, to be fair, we had to drop the sun on Japan twice to get them to play nice. Yeah, that was a rough one too. Ooh, that was a rough one because there was a lot of civilian casualties there. John K says she had to hide my mother and her siblings from being taken as slaves. That, I tell you, I would say the majority of people in the United States don't know about the history of Korea, especially under Japanese rule, 1910 to 1945 or so, whenever that was. And if you read about what the Japanese did, it'll make you cry. It is horrible. And the bad thing is that Japan schools don't teach that. There's Japanese kids and young adults today that have no clue. They think that Koreans are making this stuff up. And it's like, no, it actually happened. So there's a little bit of denial in that. And you know what? As a people group, I think you need to own up. You need to pony up. And if what your ancestors did was wrong, is you need to say, yeah, that was effed up. That was wrong. That should have never have happened. It has nothing to do with me, but that was horrible. It is what it is. But I mean, it's horrible. But now with this seizing of collaborated assets, this is going to be an interesting little thing to see. Terry says, my father-in-law hated the Japanese. He was a boy during the occupation. Ooh, yeah, I bet that was rough. And a lot of older Koreans still have animosity against Japanese because the Japanese never apologized, as far as I know. Steve, can I ask how your filament is going? Have you received it? This is a little bit of a rabbit trail. I'm going to print out a model of Spider-Man that's going to hang on my wall right behind me here. And I'm waiting for filament to get in. It's currently still delayed. So I don't know. I went ahead and I ordered another spool. So maybe that spool will get here before the one that's still delayed in transit. And I did a subscription on filament. So every 6 weeks, I'm going to get a 3 kilo spool of filament. So we won't have this problem in the future. I'll just kind of stock up my filament when I want to do a big project. I'll have the filament and I won't have to worry about that. Okay. So anyway, yeah. Yeah, crazy stuff. Perry says, check out the book called The Rape of Nanking and see the pictures of what Japanese did to the Chinese. It's hard to look at. Oh, yeah. And Japan did send some Koreans to China during that time as well. Also interesting to note that Japan made it illegal to speak Korean during the occupational rule. And teaching the Korean language was verboten. It was outlawed. It was, yeah, when you start digging into this, and it was just like insane on what happens. Yeah, absolutely crazy, absolutely crazy. So yeah, that's interesting things is reading history, and it's kind of wild, kind of wild. So anyway, we got that going on, and we'll continue on a little bit. George talks about the filament, and I do 3D printing, and we're going to do that Spider-Man. It's going to be right up in here. It's kind of a big Spider-Man wall hanging thing, and Spider-Man is one of the things. So it is indeed going to look awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. And of course, the more I want to do something, things happen. So yeah, thank you, Amazon, for that. And Swedish Forge did his Spider-Man, and it looks incredible. And Spider-Man is one of my favorite characters. The other favorite one, as you can see back here, is the Hulk. So yeah, maybe I'll do a bigger Hulk one. Maybe I could do the Hulk bursting out of a wall. Ooh, that would be good. Let's get back to the collaborators and the Japanese collaborators. And this whole thing kind of rears its head when a female actress here in Korea was like, hey, I come from a long family of doctors and blah, blah, blah. Now the question is, will this Korean actress get her assets seized or the family's assets seized because of this new collaboration thing that the government's got going on? So we're gonna take a look into this. There it is. Ha Young's family wealth under pro-Japanese asset recovery law. So this is her. Actress, good actress, I guess, apparently, she's easy on the eyes. And that her great-grandfather's pro-Japanese past, Korea's investigative commission on collaborators' property will restart in December after a 16-year hiatus, raising whether her family's assets could be examined and seized. So yeah, this is going to be interesting because the law targets the wealth and property of illegally amassed during the occupation from 1910 to 1945. It's unclear how much of this second commission will be able to recover. But they're just going to have to go through and see what happens. And she did do a thing that says that she's sorry over her great-grandfather's pro-Japanese past. I mean, how could she not? So, but she didn't do it. So don't hold that against her. It's kind of like holding the children for the sins of the father. You're going to punish the offspring for what the father did, or vice versa. It's just, no, that shouldn't be a thing. But with the asset thing, going back to World War II, that would be kind of an interesting little deal to end up. And it's like, well, what about the assets that were stolen during World War II? And the assets that the Roman Catholic Church took during that time that the Vatican still has that have never been given back to the people it was stolen from. Anywho, take farmland, for example. After the Korean government established, land reform changed ownership to many rice paddies and fields. Even land untouched by land reform over the 80 years since liberation has mostly been sold off. Lee said the recovery process largely falls into two categories: property descendants still own and property that they have already sold and profited from. But the commission can directly seize property that descendants still hold, though they are likely to sue in response. For property already sold, the state must sue for each one to recover unjust profits. That would be a very difficult process. Authorities pursue unjust profits instead of the property itself because the rights of third parties who unknowingly acquired it cannot be infringed upon. And then you also have, like, property insurance and title insurance and things like that. So, but 81 years after the liberation in 1945, the scale of assets to be recovered is not cannot be easily recovered, is what I want to say. Property sold off decades ago would have carried a low market value at the time, but land development could be worth far more today. So that comes into question. Do we do it at the price that it was back then, or are you going to use the price of the land as it is now after it appreciated? Places in Seoul, holy crow. For example, property sold for 50 million won decades ago, about 35 grand, could be worth 5 billion won now in Seoul, which would figure into the recovery. Courts would likely order recovery to be the original 50 million won, or $35,000. Efforts to recovery, so it would be like a punitive fee or whatever. Sun said the need to restore historical justice is strong, but so is the need for legal stability and property rights, citing a failed attempt to recover a luxury hotel in Seoul owned by the grandson of a collaborator. But even said that even within that difficult standard, if a case meets the requirements, I don't know. It's just going to be a very interesting thing to see what happens here with this. Let's get back to some comments, since we've got some comments coming in here. Island says this asset forfeiture is going to be wild. Lots of grudges will surface. Snitching is going to occur. Get your popcorn ready. Yeah, this is going to be a quite dramatic filled time. Also, how would you punish conscripts? George brings up a good point. And during the time of that occupation, Japan forced Korean citizens to be conscripts, military conscripts, in their military. But what do we do with that? Well, if it was done against their will, die or, be in the Japanese military, serve us or die, should you punish somebody for that? I don't think so. I don't know. Yeah, the reparations thing is just going to be, it's going to be an interesting thing in what happens here in Korea. It is definitely, I don't know. And, especially when we're talking about property, I think that is the biggest thing, is that the property comes into play. And if it's only based on the property value back then, you're missing out the point that a lot of these Japanese collaborators pass this property on to other family members, and that a property appreciated, which if they didn't have it to begin with, wouldn't have experienced that much profit. So yeah, this is going to be a very interesting, it's going to be a big deal. This is going to be interesting. And I don't understand why. I tried looking for it. I don't understand why this commission stopped after 4 years, and now it's wound back up again. I'm not sure why there was a gap. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting. With that said, since we're talking about real estate in some way, shape, or form, and The current government, since I bought an investment, I bought this apartment here in Korea. And then I just recently bought, the wife and I bought an investment property in Asan. And now there's tax changes. The government is trying to curb property prices because they're going through the roof. There's certain areas of Korea, I think like 9 different districts or areas where foreigners cannot buy investment properties. The only way they would be able to buy it is if it was their primary residence for a minimum of 2 years. So that means that you would have to have a visa to be able to buy said property and live in it. Um, Trying to curb the selling off of Korean property because there's only so much on the peninsula, which I kind of agree with. Um, but on the other side of the coin, he made some rules in real estate that pissed a lot of people off. And then the president sold property through a little squirrely thing that he did. President Lee sold property, and people were immediately pissed because they're like, whoa, wait a second. Why didn't you sell it normally? And it's like, it was a gray, unethical area. Let's put it that way. And people were pissed. And he just kind of blew it off. So people are mad. So anyway, the current president made some rules and laws for real estate to curb this, try to rein in this outlandish appreciation of property that we're seeing here in Korea, and to curb foreign investment, foreigners buying up Korean properties. I totally get that. As a foreigner who owns property, I agree with that. Um, but some of the rules that he made for real estate in taxing like new people, young couples, and so on and so forth, or people that have one or two or investment properties, he tried to bring the hammer down, which is like for properties that people already own. The thing is, these are Korean citizens, and you're bringing the hammer down on these people, and a lot of Koreans don't like it. So we're going to take a look at that. And now he's taking a look at all this stuff, and it's like, well, I think what we're going to end up doing is we're going to have to, relook some of these things. And that's basically what ended up happening. Well, the ruling party revised real estate plan under the new leadership. Public backlash fuels call for changes, but revisions risk deepening party rifts. So you've got the left and the right here in Korea. The Democratic Party of Korea, DPK, he's kind of on the left side. The People's Power Party, they're the right side, for those of you who don't know. But they want to try to overhaul the plan announced earlier this month amid growing concerns over higher tax burden, housing insecurity. The former prime minister has already voiced opposition to a proposed tax increase for single homeowners who do not live in their properties, a measure that has drawn considerable public backlash. I think if you make it so oppressive, the tax is so oppressive, people are going to get pissed off. I think there should be some reward for this, for Koreans owning homes, Korean renting homes to other Koreans or foreigners or whatever. I think that's part of the thing. The whole dream is to own your home, have a good job, have a family, the dog, the whole 9 yards, retire and, do the Korean dream, live near Seoul, so on and so forth. But now what the current president did here in Korea was have a tax system that was actually kind of seen as punitive with a lot of different Koreans. And they're like, we don't like this. This isn't a good thing. So that's why a lot of people in the current, there's a lot of people that are pissed off at this. The first high-level meeting between the ruling party and the government with the new leadership on this tax thing. The government's proposals was raise tax burden on owners of expensive homes who don't reside in them. In other words, they just bought them for the appreciation, as well as people who own multiple properties, which I would be one of those because I have this place and one more. In addition, the plan would lower the basic deduction for non-resident single homeowners under comprehensive real estate tax, effectively increasing their annual holding costs. The See, the problem with this in taxing and having such an oppressive tax on real estate is you're going to come to a place of where the tax burden, like say, I own an investment property. If I get taxed high on that, I'm just not going to eat that tax and say, thank you, give me another. I'm going to pass that increased expense onto the rent. I'm going to raise the rents to offset that. And I don't think the current government understands that, because now that's what people are talking about doing. And it's like the government is trying to make and have more housing for people, provide more housing, reel in the prices of real estate. Well, and part of this is by doing this tax thing, which home ownership here in Korea is really hard anyway. And so now most people are left to renting. And now by doing this tax thing, rents are going to go up. So you're doing the opposite of what you intended. And this is going to cause a lot of problems. So yeah, critics argued that a measure could place heavier burden on single homeowners, including those with legitimate reasons for not living in their properties. Kim already expressed opposition to the overhaul during his leadership campaign and called for a reconsideration. Scrapping the holding deduction for non-resident single homeowners could effectively raise rates on those properties valued at 1.2 billion won, $857,000 or more, a threshold that covers a large share of apartments in Seoul. Particular attention should be paid to the ripple effects of tax changes for middle-class single homeowners who do not live in their properties, especially on the rental market. And again, basically saying what I just said, it will increase rents. So the Ministry of Finance and Economy drew up the tax overhaul plan, initially planned to make targeted adjustments to new individual savings account scheme in response to public feedback, while keeping the real estate tax overhaul largely intact and leaving its final passage in the National Assembly, kind of like in our Senate and House and getting things approved. So they need to rethink on the housing and the taxes and so on and so forth. A lot of people are like, no, this isn't good. Some people are saying, yeah, this is needed, but a lot more people don't like it than like it. Some people say this represents a sound housing reform agenda under President Lee. Any changes should be limited to fine-tuning rather than altering its overall direction. So they still want to tax. They just want to fine-tune it. I don't think that's a good way to go. And, I kind of throw this stuff into Grok or Chat GPT and to see what they say. And it's kind of like, yeah, it's going to raise taxes for rent rates. And when it's hard to purchase a property in Korea to begin with because of the high property prices that you can't make smaller, because once that cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back in. Now you're left with rent. And Korea is moving over to a monthly rent rate. Now, they did have this thing. You can either buy a property, which is pretty expensive, or you could rent a property with a huge down payment, which is called jeonse, which is the deposit for a tenant would be about 50 to 70% of the property price. So when you think of a property that's $800,000 to $1 million, $2 million, that's huge. Or even $250,000 or $500,000. 50 to 70% of that is a down payment that the tenant would give to the landlord. If I'm the landlord, they give me that, then I would invest that money or use it. And for 2 years, the tenant doesn't have to pay rent. Sounds like an awesome deal. The problem is that now with such high property prices, people can't get that huge down payment, in which people were actually getting loans to get that deposit payment. And now it's like people aren't doing that. And so then there was another rental type of thing, similar to jeonse, as a wose, where it would be a smaller down payment. You would have to pay a monthly amount, but it would be small. And then you have kind of like what we see in the United States, you have a monthly rent. So you pay like a deposit 1 or 2 months, and then you pay a higher monthly rent. Well, Korea is, which I predicted, is going towards more monthly rentals because people can't afford the Jonsei or the Wosei. So with this, that's good for the people because there's more affordable rents with the pay that they're getting compared to the Jonsei and the Wosei. The problem is now with this additional tax that the current administration wants to put into play is it's going to raise the rent rates. And in the depressed economy that we have, which is weird because we still have hard times going on in Korea, but the Kospi and the won is doing well. SK Hynix and Samsung are doing really well, which makes up a majority of the wealth in the Korean stock exchange, which is kind of like putting your eggs in two baskets, not one, but two. But it is kind of one basket because it's all betting on AI and chips and so on and so forth. So we'll see how that works out. I digress. Monthly rent rates are going to go up when you tax the people that have one or more rental properties. They're not going to eat that and say, thank you, sir, give me another. They're going to say, okay, new rent. Yeah, your rent is going up. I don't know. I don't know. It just seems weird. It seems weird. But both sides are saying, housing is a top concern and so on and so forth. And yeah, we need to change this and that. And it's just, I just don't think there's a lot of common sense. There's probably a lot of smart people in government. There is. I'm not that smart. But the common sense thing is that, and it's funny, when you go into, I was in investment real estate. I did rental properties, I flipped properties, I bought properties, fixed them up, turned them over, rented them out, flipped them. The whole, we did all that. At one time, our family business had like what, 30, 40 different properties. I worked on 60 different properties where we bought them from banks. We got a loan to pay ourselves to fix the properties, and we turned around and either we flipped them or we rented them out for positive cash flow. 60 properties. So redoing windows, doors, kitchens, cabinets, the whole nine yards, redoing basically the interior of a lot of these properties. I did all that stuff. And when you can either do one of two things, but you can't do both. If you're going to raise and kind of make rules and saying, hey, you can't buy properties, that's one thing, because then that forces the high prices. People can't buy properties, so now they got to go to the rental side of the market. But then when you raise the taxes on the people that have multiple properties, that's going to raise the monthly rent rate of those properties, which isn't good for people either. You either do one or the other. You don't do both at the same time. And unfortunately, the current administration also made it a little bit harder for some new young couples to get properties. And there are like first time home buyer, they get decreased interest rates and so on, like 3 point something percent, maybe the high twos or whatever. The interest rate that we got on the apartment that we bought was 5.11%. So yeah, there's a foreigner investment rate, which I totally agree with. If you're a foreigner, then you should have to pay a little bit more than the citizens of the country that you're in, so that the country can benefit. I'm totally for that. So anyway, you will own nothing and be miserable because the cost will continue to rise. That's true. But there's also some other stuff here in Korea with real estate that is coming into play with the current administration wants to provide less expensive housing. Hang with me here. Let me go get some. I got to get me a snack bar because I am hangry. So let me go get something real quick. Otherwise, that would be bad. Let me get a little snack bar thing. Kind of. I don't have any Snickers, so I'll just have to get a Nutri-Grain bar, and hopefully that'll ward off any fainting spells that I could have. So anyway, it ends up that the other thing that Korea is thinking about doing is for the government to provide lower cost housing and rentals, specifically rentals. Hmm. I'm so hungry, I'm nauseous. Mm, mm. And of course, drinking lattes when you're angry doesn't help. So, I know it's kind of rude to eat in front of people, but I just have to eat. Dina says, great show. Thank you. Well, you're welcome. Thank you for showing up. You helped make it great as well. So anyway, the current administration here in Korea wants to provide low cost housing, affordable housing, so to speak. And whenever I hear that from a government entity, provide low cost housing, I know there's going to be problems. We've seen it in the United States in the real estate crash a couple times in the United States. Affordable housing, and then which means that they lowered the standards for loans and gave loans to people that were high risk, and then the whole market exploded artificially, and then the bubble burst, and then people that couldn't or shouldn't have loans defaulted, and it ended up being an ugly mess. Yeah, it was just horrible. Um, anyway, so Korean government wants to give affordable housing. Okay, I get that. The intention is good. I think affordable housing is good. Affordable rents are good for people and young couples, young people, yada, yada, yada. I am 100% for that. But it comes at a cost. And so now Korea is kind of playing around with this idea that they want to get into the housing market, and that George brought up that you will own nothing, that the government is going to own the housing. Kind of almost sounds socialist. The government. Anyway, so the government is going to own these places, and they're going to say, hey, we're kind of like capping the rent, saying, hey, well, this rent is only going to be down here compared to what it is here, on the public market. And a lot of people would be like, oh, that's fantastic. Low rents, that is awesome. But the problem is somebody has to pay. And that payment comes through taxes. And so, in other words, at a time in Korea where property prices are really, 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 really high, the government wants to buy properties with taxpayer money and then have lower rent rates, but they still have to pay for the loan. That'll be at an interest rate, probably 3-4%, somewhere around there, which is still a significant amount of money for the thing that they want to do. But the problem is that the rent rates will not cover the mortgage of those properties. So to make up that deficit, the government needs money. Governments don't make money. They tax people, and the people that make the money get taxed, and the government takes that tax money to deal with the offset. Taxes are going to go up. And so really, you're going to get to a place of where it's like the whole idea is, well, if we tax everybody, then the people that are lower on the economic scale will have a better chance. And we all need to do our part. Where has that worked out? Probably not, ever. It doesn't work out that way, because now you have this asset that is a liability, that the money coming in doesn't pay the amount that needs to go out. And to make that up, you have to tax people more and more. Now, at the height of a government or a country, let's just say the height of a country where the majority of people, you got a bunch of people that after World War II, say after Korea, World War II, Vietnam, all that people had a lot of kids and families were big and the whole nine yards, you have a big population, then that absolutely works. But the problem is, Korea is not that. They are a super age society. And then there's more people that are old and aged than the young people. The old people are old. They're going to go away. They're going to shed their mortar coils and go. And we don't have enough young people. So, in other words, this whole thing, this whole dynamic is saying, well, if we spread the tax burden around to everybody, it'll be good. Well, that's only if your population is large and continues to get larger. If the population shrinks, you have a smaller tax base, which is going to be like, oh, well, shit, we need all this money and we have less people. So what's going to happen to the people? More taxes. It just is what it is. The other thing that this is going to affect is people that build apartment buildings, real estate companies. The government's going to say, oh, we can't have public, companies making money on this because we want to do affordable housing. I totally expect to see the Korean government probably, I'm just kind of looking in my crystal ball and guessing, is that they will probably make some oppressive measure or law or policy, whatever you want to say, that will make it not as advantageous for private companies to build apartments because the profit margins are going to be too small. There'll be too many regulations. There'll be too many taxes because, again, that's another way that you're going to curb private companies from building expensive houses is by making them not build those houses. And again, the tax burden is going to be placed upon the people, which is a shrinking population, which means more taxes. And I don't know, there's just something about the government. And I haven't seen a government where they provide housing where it gets better over time. It always corrodes and decays and gets worse for the people. So, I don't know. Dina says it's the plan to tear down KIDA and KDI, these institutes near Korean University. Yes, exactly. For those of you who don't know, Dina's talking about there's Korean universities that own land that the current Korean government administration says, hey, well, we're going to build affordable houses. We got this land here and blah, 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 blah. And then the Korean universities that own that land said, well, this is the first time we're hearing of this. So, yeah, there's going to be some drama. And, it would be one thing if the universities said, you know what, we're on board with this. We're going to do our part because of charity and we care for our own people, that we're going to sell this land at cost or at a reduced rate, whatever it is, to help lessen the burden, or make it more affordable for housing to be built. That's not the case. If you look back to Rome and what people ended up doing when they got rich, the rich people got rich in Rome. And often what they ended up doing is funding charities and things for the people because they felt it was their duty and their responsibility to say, you know what, I was able to become successful. So why I want to give back to society. So instead of trying to make a buck off of people, they would give their money, kind of similar to what the old rich people did in the United States, with public libraries and this and that. And then, these acts of, I guess, charity, I guess you could say, on a huge scale to benefit the majority of the people with no strings attached, oftentimes, that is what should be done. Give back to society. The problem is that when people don't want to do that and the government steps in and says, well, we can't, we're going to force people to do this and we're going to force everybody to be taxed and basically feed or penalized to do this thing, even though it doesn't make financial sense. Whereas kind of like in Rome and other rich people that did acts of charity where it does make financial sense, we're not seeing those two things marry up. So yeah, it's funny how Dina brought that up, and it brings to mind how the universities were like, what? We never, this property here? You didn't, no one talked to us about it, which brings into question eminent domain. Is the government just going to seize property and say, well, it's for the good of the nation, kind of like what they do in the United States? Yeah, better get lots of popcorn. It's going to be interesting. Then they'll say, let's just bring in more foreigners that will fix it, and then the housing problem just grows. Yep. Which is exactly what is happening in Korea because you have a lack of workers in Korea, especially for agricultural, factory, caregivers, and so on and so forth. A lot of those areas, there are no Korean workers, so they have to get foreign workers. In Korea, there's a big push to get foreigners to come and do those things, but they need to be housed somewhere. And again, it's I don't know. It's going to be really, really interesting, and it depends on what foreigners you bring in. Not all foreigners are good, and I say this as a foreigner. Not all foreigners are good. They need to be vetted. They need to, you know, yeah. Dun, 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 dun. My wife saw an article that said they're trying to make Yongsan Family Park and build apartments there. Oh, Yongsan Park is Family Park is where Yongsan, where the United States forces Korea. It was like the big hub for the U.S. military and the UN and so forth. That land all got turned back over to Korea, along with a lot of other military bases up north got turned back to Korea. But now they're talking about instead of leaving it as a big park or whatever they want to do, they want to build apartment buildings there because land is limited. So a bunch of people are like, no, we need green spaces. And I don't know, but is it the government land, which is the people's land? And then if apartments are built on it, that means it's private. So is the Korean government going to step in and build apartments on there? I don't know. It's something like that. I could see the government building apartments and building housing and subsidized. I really hate subsidized because that means higher taxes. But, from the Korean War, that property was dirt cheap and now it is super, super expensive. So if the government just said, hey, we're going to use this for housing and the public housing, the government is going to build properties on there. We're going to charge lower rents. That might be doable. It'd be like me saying, hey, I own an acre of land and I'm going to donate this acre of land. It's really, really expensive, but I'm just going to donate it so that you can put a charity on there. And so that way their operating costs are cut in half because they don't have to pay a huge mortgage for the land or lease on the land. That might be something that could work. But again, you're still talking about you're going to have to, you'll be able to build apartments at a discount because you won't have a mortgage on the land. That you'd have to run the numbers and see that could work. Could be state owned, could have lower rents there in Seoul. I don't know. We'll see how this goes. We will see how this goes. So yeah, a lot of interesting things going on as far as taxes and real estate and all of that stuff. So let me. A little musical interlude while I finish my snack. Oh, wow. Really good. And the lattes are awesome. Okay. So anyway, that's what we got going on here. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. The thing is, with me and my one investment property, I'm right on the edge of whether I should be taxed or not. But with these new real estate laws that are coming into play, we'll just have to wait and see. The good thing is, we only borrowed like $54,000 in won to finance this property. So even though we have a mortgage, which is at 5.11% and adjusts every month, but it's not like a fully adjustable loan. We should have this paid off within 3 years. And currently, we're still making, even though we have a mortgage, we're still making about $650 a month USD. So even if the taxes go up, we'll lose a little bit of profit, but we're still going to be making money. I don't like paying taxes. If I have to, I guess I have to. Death and taxes, those are the only two things, at least death is certain. But taxes, you can kind of minimize those. But the fact that we had such a huge down payment, even if the economy goes down, if the real estate market crashes here in Korea, because that property is paid off, and if there's higher taxes, we're still going to be okay. I won't like it, but we'll still be okay. And it's all according to plan, so it works out good. So anyway, what about this last thing that we got up here? Female inmate pen pal controversy in Korea. Oh, this is a doozy, because this kind of comes close to my heart because I worked in prison for over 11 years, and this is going to be an interesting one. Yeah, they have prisons here in Korea. They have women's prisons, they have men's prisons, they even have a foreigners prison here in Korea, where foreigners who commit crimes and get charged and punished go to foreigner prisons. I think it's in Chonan, here in Korea. But now, kind of like in the States, now I know some of you are kind of my age or kind of older-ish, or you're young and you're knowledgeable. You know that way back in the day, you could be pen pals with inmates, and you could, develop an inmate relationship with somebody who is incarcerated, and be pen pals, eventually become boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, boyfriend, girlfriend. And so you had pen pal things way back in the day that you could correspond with inmates and romantic interests and so on and so forth. That was a thing in the United States. And then, of course, as technology progressed, you can do it all online. You can do that, and inmates get their letters via tablet and whatever, and of course, inmates are going to want money, put on their books. And then you have inmates that will have multiple boyfriends or multiple girlfriends running scams just so they could get money on their books. That's a thing. When I worked in prisons in Southern Colorado, I knew one inmate that had 20 girlfriends. Dude was a poet like nobody's business, but he wrote the same letters for all 20. Basically, all he did was change the names. And all of those women were sending him money every single month. 20 women. And he wasn't getting out of prison. So that is coming into play. And of course, you have these companies that will marry you up with inmates behind bars and do the whole pen pal thing, and where you have to pay a fee to gain access to do this. And, people are making money off of that. The same thing is happening here in Korea, and it's causing an uproar. I just thought this was kind of a funny little thing here. We'll take a look at this. So $49 to become pen pals with female inmates. Now it's just the female inmates, it's not the males. Paid matchmaking service stirs controversy in Korea. And there it is. There's a shot of a prison there in Cheongju, women's prison. And you basically got the doors. They don't have air conditioning, pretty much. It's not like some places in the United States. They're very sparse prisons in Korea. And you can see the big fans. They got a couple of big fans there. And it's just not fun in prison. So anyway, an apparent paid service that brokers pen pal connections with female inmates has sparked controversy amid suspicions that documents containing the inmates' ages, physical characteristics, and other personal information are being circulated for commercial purposes by companies offering said correspondence services. A document titled Correctional Facility List recently circulated online. The list contains the names and ages of 56 female inmates, the prisons where they are incarcerated, and physical information including height and weight, and some other stuff. At the top of the document, the notice says Correctional Pen Pal Matching, 70,000 won, which is about $50. With 3 letters from the matched women guaranteed. Guaranteed. 3. Here it is that the business will take a big cut of the money, and then the women in the prison will probably get a cut out of that as well. So the thing we have to understand here is that this is probably a business. It is a business. It's not probably, it's never probably about it. It is a business, and I've seen it similar in the United States. Um, but the inmates have to agree to do this. Okay, it's not like they're being forced against their will. Um, it's a paid service. It's often offered to arrange a correspondence, and there's the list there, and you got some height and weight and so on and so forth. 52 kilos, 160 centimeters, blah blah blah, and all that. Guarantees 3 letters. That's from an online community. Document also contains descriptions of women's appearance, like personalities, innocent looking and curvy, puppy like personality, affectionate and kind. Oh, and by the way, I broke the law bad enough to get into prison. It is what it is. Excuse me. Yeah, there's even a guarantee, but that's the thing. DJD says, yeah, there's a guarantee because the inmates are part of this business deal. It's not like these women are made to do something against their will. They have to sign up to do this, and they receive money for it, kind of like what we see in the United States. Terry says, poor Johnny Somali can't even have a pen pal. I don't even know who would want to talk to Johnny Somali. That guy he's an asshat in the first degree. So he's one of those people that's a waste of space, a waste of DNA. So anyway, other entries include phrases like majored in dance, former nurse, could reveal information about inmates' backgrounds. Well, yeah, that's kind of what dating and correspondence does. You have to have some information. Some entries even list their MBTI personality traits and celebrities they supposedly resemble. Okay, cool. Document is believed to have created by a company that provides services for inmates, such as delivering goods or visiting them in prison on behalf of others. So again, as I said, this is a company that, it is what it is. And the women are not forced to get into this, which, if to me personally, I don't care. Just know that there could probably be, it's not a one-on-one service. So in other words, you could have multiple guys talking to a single inmate thinking that they're the only guy. And it could be the same thing where the woman just writes the same letter to everybody and just changes the name. I've seen that happen so many times. Do you need a bigger red flag? No. He is using my error and I want a refund in regards to Johnny Somali. Yeah, I know. So many people are like that. Correspondence between inmates has long been practiced in Korea. Some inmates are said to form relationships, so exchanging letters with the first person released, later providing support for the other inmate or depositing money into their prison account. I can tell you that is true in the United States and overseas. Yeah. In the world of the prisons, inmates will borrow stuff from other inmates, or they'll gamble, they'll do things, and they will have to pay money back or, off of their canteen. Hey, I'm really hungry. Can I get a ramen? If you give me a ramen now, I'll give you 2 when I get money into my account. And, so there's all of that. And then I've also seen it and talked to inmates who got out of prison that actually worked when I was doing real estate. We did inmate outreach and actually helped employ inmates who had gotten out of prison. And they helped us work on rehabbing houses. We provided free housing, and then they got, money to live and so on and so forth. And then we worked with the probation office and things like that. We didn't do too much of that. But we did it a number of times to where the guys are like, hey, I borrowed money. I need to make money to pay back because I'm good on my word and whatever. Some people don't do that. But yeah, it's definitely a thing. However, some are calling for restrictions on commercial businesses that broker such correspondence or distribute female personal information without their consent. Well, yeah, that should, duh. Yeah, that, and I don't know how you could, if it was, if a woman that's incarcerated doesn't want this to come out, and you do, and a business does put her personal information out there, the inmate should be able to file a lawsuit against said business and sue them and make money that way, because it's without their consent. So, in other words, using them basically as advertising for their business when they didn't agree to such a deal. So, yeah, these companies are blinded by money, they're turning inmates' personal information into a commodity, which is absolutely true. Another said personal information should not receive less protection simply because one is an inmate. Authorities first need to clearly determine the extent to which the individuals concerned consented to this. So yeah, I totally agree with that. If you agree to it, then yeah, you could have your information put out there as to be an inmate pen pal, men, women, whatever. Yeah, it's a binding agreement with the business. Yes, I will. You can put out my information there. This is what I'm going to put out. They'll do a contract saying, hey, you're going to get this much money. You'll have to provide 3 letters guaranteed per person that contacts you, blah, 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 and we'll give you X amount of money. I totally get that. But if these companies are indeed, and then there's nothing saying that they did, these are just people online saying this let me double check. Some are calling for restrictions on commercial businesses that broker and use their personal information without their consent. So some are calling for restrictions on commercial. If there is a commercial business that is doing this without their consent, then yeah, there should already be laws on the books, not specifically for inmates, but you're using my information, my likeness, and so on and so forth for you to profit, and I didn't agree to that, they should be able to sue. So hopefully something like that does happen. But as far as like, you want to, I don't know, you want to do the pen pal thing with an inmate? I don't recommend it, especially after the stuff that I saw in prison, working in prisons for over 11 years. I have seen, and I supposedly saw um, inmates get out. I didn't supposedly saw. I saw inmates get out that hooked up with the women that they were writing, and they hooked up and they became boyfriend and girlfriend during their letter writing campaign. And then, of course, the women gave them money on their books. Joe inmate gets out. They meet. Yeah, everything looks good for a while, but then I don't know of any of them that kept their woman. It always ended in divorce. It always ended in a split of the relationship. Um, there's very, very few. And when I'm talking few, I'm talking like the numbers of fingers that I have on this hand. And this is after working like 11 years in prisons and then doing a number of years in prison ministry, of seeing and, working with inmates and parole, while they're on parole and so on and so forth. Um, Very few have good relationships with the pen pal boyfriend girlfriend thing. It's this many and less. And one of those was shaky. So, yeah, we're talking about basically 4, where it seemed that they had gotten out, they got married, they were doing really well. Only 4 out of hundreds, hundreds. So, and it's probably more than the hundreds because of the amount of inmates that I've talked to who supposedly had, oh, it's a great relationship. And then, you know, that doesn't even count the broken relationships when you find out that the inmates lied and so on and so forth. It's just, yeah, just cut it out. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's not worth it. It is not worth it. 9 times out of 10. One of the biggest ways for people to make money in prison is through the romance poetry, pen pal letters. Yeah, some people say, "Oh, it's got to be dealing drugs." No, it's writing those romance letters. That is the thing. Um, Hey, we got Sultan in here. Hi, Steve. What's up? Looks like I'm late to the party again. Oh, that's okay. That's okay. You can always go back and watch again. George says, "Oh, but a beautiful woman named Chuck might be right for someone." And when I was working in prisons in Southern Colorado, you could send pictures. So in other words, you get it as an inmate could go and get a picture, and then they could send that picture to the person that they're writing to, and whatever. Of course, they draw pictures. You had inmates that would draw pictures that looked like photographs. Incredible art. Of course, that would cost you a couple of soups, 3 or 4 soups, depending on the detail or anything. And then you had inmates that were writing women, and these guys didn't know how to write. So that inmate would hire another inmate that would write romantic letters that would just like, oh my gosh, seriously, it'd make my heart flutter. And then he would sell those letters to other inmates, so that inmate could send that to his girl, and she would send him money, and then he would give a cut of the money to the other inmate, who was the kind of like the Cyrano de Bergerac of the inmate world. Saw a lot of that going around too. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. And people would pass their letters around. Hey, I'm trying to write this lady and blah, blah, blah. And they'd be there in the pod, you know, at the table. And it's like, I'm walking around. It's like, hey, what you guys doing? Oh, so-and-so's writing this girl, and he doesn't, he's just starting doing a letter writing thing. And so I'm showing him one of my letters that I wrote to these 5 other girls and blah, blah, blah. And, oh, okay. And then you read it and you're like, holy crap, you need to work for Walmart or Hallmark. Um, and, some guys do it for free. A lot of them do it for money, you know, to teach other inmates how to write romantic letters and the whole spiel. I mean, it's like a college class in romance, send me money scam 101. It is incredible. It's just like, you look at some of this stuff and it's like, holy crap, you mind if I use this for a card for my wife? No, bro, go ahead. And it's like, thanks. Um, Absolutely insane, the stuff that you see in prison. And I knew a correctional officer that worked at the women's prison. And I know, here's the interesting thing. You see on TV and some of the questionable videos on women's prisons and stuff like that. This guy that I knew who worked in a women's prison as a guard, he's like, oh no, it is not like in the movies or the racy videos that you see online. It is nothing like that. The majority of the women are obese, they're ugly, they're overweight, they're rude, their personality sucks, they stink, they don't wash themselves. He goes, it's like, it is the worst place to be. And he's like, he said he liked working there, but he made everybody know that, hey, don't even try to snuggle up to me or try to, blink your eyes and try to get special consideration because I'm a guy. He said, no, he didn't put up with that shit, which was funny. It was hilarious, the stories he would tell. But yeah, he says there's very few good looking inmates. The majority of them are not. And in Colorado, it's you could go online. We had access to the database where you could look up inmates and you could do query searches for, men, women, last name, first name, whatever it is, age. You could query all the inmates in the state of Colorado. And yeah, he showed us. And it was, yeah, look at this, women, here's the place I worked. And you're like, holy crow, there's some heifers in there. And there's some ugly ones. And he's like, yeah. And yeah, it's just crazy. It's crazy, And the women will be doing the same scam as well. They'll be writing guys that write into them and doing the same thing. Doing the love letters, this or that. Oh, sweetie, I can't wait until I get out and we can be together. But if you could throw me some money on my books, that would help out, make time go by better, and blah, blah, blah. It's all a game. He said the same thing. There's women that are writing multiple men. They're getting paid multiple streams of income, writing the exact same thing to all the same guys. So, yeah. Uh, George says, run from the swamp donkey. That's hilarious. The swamp donkey. I got to remember that. Oh, Sultan says, in other news, Trump and Putin apparently decide that their next playground for stirring up chaos is Asia. Really? Oh, no. I know there's the thing with Trump talking about Korea and that he made this weird thing saying, because Korea didn't help participate in the Strait of Hormuz thing that's going on, that now, and Korea wants to take over the operational control of the military here in Korea. They want to stand up. President Lee, during this administration here in Korea, wants to take over operational control. And that's kind of been on the list for a long time. But he really wants to do it during his term here. And but Trump is like, oh, we pay for a lot of the exercises we do for Korea, and it's all for naught, basically, because you didn't help us with the Strait of Hormuz, which, like, I just don't. If that's what you're talking about, I don't get that either. It's just, and then Putin, I don't know what Putin has said recently. So, interesting stuff. Interesting stuff indeed. But yeah, it's just kind of some weird stuff going on. Eventually, Korea is going to stand on their own. I think they should stand on their own as their own sovereign country. I totally believe that. But on the other side of the coin, I also believe that Korea is a strategic point in this part of the world for the United States and other forces to help. And I'm not sure. We're in this state of flux. I'm not sure how this is going to go. So, but then again, the current administration also just called that he wants to end the Korean War. So he wants to talk with North Korea and say, hey, we since 1953 or 54 or whatever, we're at just basically a peace treaty. The war never stopped. So President Lee wants to stop the Korean War and officially end it. I don't think North Korea will play that game, but it's, he wants to reduce the tensions, and he has done stuff to reduce some of the tension between the North and South. And then with Trump coming into play and saying that he wants to reduce the number of exercises, military exercises, joint exercises in Korea, I don't know. That could work in Lee's favor. So, but yeah, I haven't heard the Putin thing. I'll have to look into that. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And as people know, I'm an independent. I'm not pro-Trump or anti-Trump. If there's things that people do that don't make sense to me, I won't like it. If they do stuff that makes sense, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle they are. If it makes sense, then I like it. So there it is. Yeah. But we'll see what happens. But I do know, like I said, North Korea is supposed to kick in about 30,000 troops over to Russia to help fight in Ukraine. Of course, the last 11,000 or so that he sent over to the Ukraine went into the meat grinder and didn't return. So I don't know how well that's going to come into that's going to work out. Maybe it's just all the problem soldiers in North Korea. It's like, go. We will see. We will see where that all happens. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff here. Sultan says, so it's like a scene from the X-Men First Class. Trump comes knocking, trying to recruit South Korea to help clean up Iran debacle, and South Korea says, go F yourself. And which, it's, I understand wanting help. And according to international law, You can't charge for the Strait of Hormuz, so Iran is operating against international treaties. That's a fact. But the way that Trump is going about it, I just. And then now you're going to punish Korea for not jumping into the fray with Iran. Blowing up, and I don't think Korea wants to put their boats and ships and oil. You know, I think they just need to get that pipeline so they don't even have to use that Strait of Hormuz, and we'll just be done with that. Just kind of take them out of the picture, and we'll be done with that. Just do pipelines or whatever. The other thing, here's a funny thing I saw. I actually saw a video where, and I have to take it at face value, maybe 20 years ago, I would have said, nah, it's fake. But people are so dumb these days. You had this person who went and interviewed these young people and said, well, we got this thing with the Straits of Hormuz. And don't you think that shouldn't we be concerned about the LGBTQ of Hormuz as well as straight people? I mean, shouldn't it also be, the gays and the lesbians of Hormuz, that we should include them in and all this? And the young ladies, you're absolutely right. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we're only focusing on, the heterosexuals and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, and she would look serious. I was like, oh my gosh, seriously. We have the dumbest people on the planet right now. It was like, and it looks like she was like in her early 20s. Holy crap. She thought the Straits of Hormuz was about straight people, and that the unrepresented gays of Hormuz were being marginalized. That's what happens when you don't teach world geography and history. You end up with people saying crazy stuff like that. That is insane. I mean, that's how. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I was watching the video. I almost spit out my coffee when I saw that. I was like, oh shit. Seriously. She's serious. Yeah. Terry says, with the Korean birth rate low, it could lead to problems with them standing on their own military. And that's absolutely true. Terry brings up a good point, and there was actually an article talking about this. It was a little while ago, but it was talking about how the population in Korea has gotten so aged, and we don't have a lot of young people, that now that is affecting national defense here in Korea. So that's the other thing. I mean, you've got the United States is over here. They got about 28, 30,000, service members, soldiers, family, contractors, whatever, to help defend the peninsula. And then you have the United Nations over here and others to help be a deterrent against North Korea and China, mostly North Korea. And now this low birth rate, for those of you who don't know, male Koreans have to do a mandatory service of, I think, 18 to 24 months. Mandatory military service, unless you're got some serious thing going on, or you're rich and you can pay your way out of it and whatever, which people have done. So anyway, with that, now with the decrease of the population, they're not having so many kids. This is going to affect the national defense. So when we're talking about Korea standing up and defending itself, there's a possibility, if they want to maintain that level of readiness with their own people, they might have to increase the amount of mandatory military service, or have mandatory military service for women as well. Now, women can volunteer to serve in the military, and that's become a big thing. But yeah, it's been very, very interesting. Very, very interesting on, what do you do when you have a shrinking population? Now, with that being said, Korea has had a big uptick in births, but I don't think it's enough. It's not, and that babies that are born now, yeah, we got a bunch of babies that are being born now, not enough to replace the population. but you still have to wait 20, 22 years before they can serve in the military. So you're still going to have this period where you're not going to have enough people to serve. So either you're going to have to bring down the number of people, which is, you could do that, doing their mandatory military service, because we have technology, and a lot of technology can replace people to some degree. But, overall, you still need to have boots on the ground. So how is that going to work out? But yeah, there have been talks about possibly women, they've been throwing the idea around mandatory military service, or make it more beneficial for people to volunteer and serve in the military, kind of like they do in the military in the United States and other countries. If you join the military, you'll get this benefit, that benefit, so on and so forth. So, yeah, it could be a thing. It could be a thing. Someone says, also, have you guys noticed how eerily quiet China has been? You're not the only one. For a while there, it was like, oh, and then all of a sudden, and it kind of went down. China's a whole different ball of wax. And the way I was raised is that China was the evil bad guys, because they were communists, and the Cultural Revolution and Mao and the whole nine yards. Millions of its own people died. Tens of millions of people died under the the uprising and all that stuff. And then communism it petered out. Yeah, it was like, hey, housing, the state owns everything, and the state provides everything for the people, but the people still had to work. It's not like the socialists and the communists we have in the United States that think that, well, if we have socialism and communism in the United States, I won't have to work, and the state I'll be able to freeload. No, that's not how communism works. You still have to work under communism. But communism didn't work out well. And they found that out in, what was it, like the 1930s, 1940s? I think it was the 1940s. And then there was a shift, because it's like, hey, communism thing. It's like, yeah, our country's not growing. Our economy's down. Yeah, this whole shit show's not working out for us. We need to change a little bit. And so from basically the 1940s to 1950s until now, China has changed from a purely communist country to a communist capitalist country. So they adopted capitalism and business, free market, all of that thing, and then sprinkled in a little bit of their ideology, but really tried to become a powerhouse in manufacturing, which they ended up doing. And it is crazy. And I think that's where Korea is coming in. I'm not saying Korea administration is doing this right now, but they want to have different centers within Korea to be certain hubs, manufacturing, banking, finance, economy, blah, 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 and all that stuff in different areas of Korea, so it will benefit the country as a whole. China has done that to some degree, and then they've streamlined their industrial processes for certain cities, produce certain things. And so if you want something, a plushie built or whatever, you go to this certain city, and that's where all the plushies are made. Or if you need a chip or this for that, you go to this certain city. If you want, this or that, or injection molding, you go to this one over here. And all of the suppliers, all of the manufacturers, everything associated with that sector for those goods are in that one big city, and those are kind of spread out. And interestingly enough, the material support for all that are in those areas as well. So, and it's working really well. So it's way more efficient. So China has actually become an industrial powerhouse. The problem is that the United States is the majority. I think they take up to 40% of what China puts out is consumed by the United States. So the problem with that is that if you've got, the United States is the biggest consumer of Chinese products, and then the rest of the country kind of pales in comparison, they still have a bunch of Chinese products, is now a lot of your return is based off of one big customer. And then likewise, China provides all the stuff for the United States, and we're the biggest consumer of that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But yeah, China has gotten really, really quiet. And let's see. Sultan says either the internal shift has finally caught up with them or they're quietly cooking something up. Somehow, I'm not sure which one is more concerning. Yeah, I'm not sure either. It is, but they've gone quiet. They kind of do their thing, and they're playing and dealing with the whole um, the tariff wars that Trump ended up putting in, which I agree with. You know, it either needs to be a level playing field. It needs to be an equal playing field, not fair. I'll say equal. Um, you know, because I think that's good, and then it kind of keeps the competition in there, which is good, and capitalism is good, free market economy is good, and so on and so forth. But I also think there needs to be, definite rules that a country needs to follow. Now, what those rules are going to be different from country to country. Terry says he's going to go out and run. Everybody have a good day or evening. Yes, you as well. Have a good run. Enjoy yourself. Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate that. George says that China has basically bought Canada, and they basically bought a lot of other places as well. They'll go into, let's say, less economically successful countries and went in there and said, hey, we'll build this port city. We'll build you some roads. We'll build you some infrastructure, and it'll be good for your people, but you got to throw us a bone. And so some of those bones have been that the Chinese are able to take control of those ports and that they can charge whatever they want to charge. So shipping is going to be a thing throughout the world. It's always going to be that way because the natural resources are located in different places around the globe. But I think China understands that if you either control the resources, another way to make money is to control the ports of which those resources pass through. So if they go into a third world country and they say, hey, we're going to build this port city and we'll do all this, we'll do the infrastructure, we'll build your roads and bridges and the whole 9 yards, but we get control of the port. A lot of those poor countries that can't build the port or do any of that stuff for themselves say, sounds good to me. And now China's making money that way. So they're expanding their network, and actually it's smart business. If you can't control the materials for the products, control how the products get to the customers and make the money that way, because you're going to get a cut of everything that comes in and out of the port. So that's kind of crazy. But China is also known for buying up properties in many countries overseas. And like in Korea, the largest foreign country for foreign-owned properties in Korea is China. And there are a huge segment that own property in a lot of other countries as well as the United States. So, I think there should be a limit personally, and this is me as a foreigner who owns property in Korea. I think there should be a limit of how much property a foreigner can earn or have in that country that they're residing in. I know it sounds weird. You'd think I would say as an American, oh, you should be free to buy up all the property you want. I'm not a citizen of Korea. I feel the same way in the United States. The United States should own, some foreigners can own some property, but there should be things that keep America property in the hands of Americans. And the same thing, Koreans should have first dibs at property, and there should be a limit on how much property that foreigners can buy. And especially when it gets to, since there's no reciprocity between Korea and Japan, so not Korea and Japan, China and Japan, Chinese can come over here and buy properties in Korea, but in Korea, they can't go to China and buy property. And there was actually a big stink about that a while ago. And then the government suddenly, people were up in arms and blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, okay, that was the last president. Now this president is real, oh, Chinese, come over, do tourism here in our country. And we get a lot of Chinese over here. But then he also limited the number of properties that all foreigners can buy property. So It's this weird relationship that they got going on. George says that is why the tariffs on Canada must hold. Yeah, you know, and the whole thing with tariffs, when you have tariffs from Canada that are charging the United States, 200 or 300%, and it's not reciprocal, it should just be an equal playing field, you know. But so many foreign interests have been served at the hands of U.S. politicians through unfair tariffs that it's good to see, and I don't care if the left does it or the right does it, I think it's good to see that those tariffs are managed and equal. And George says that they're a backdoor. So in other words, China goes to a country, they'll do manufacturing there, they'll ship the products from China to that country, and then that country, it gets shipped into the United States. And it's like, you can't blame them. If that's legal, then they can do that. But that's a whole nother ball of wax compared to like just Canada as a whole. They were charging 300% interest for this. So in other words, the US would have to pay a bunch of money, but there is no reciprocal thing there. So in other words, we're getting screwed as the United States from Canada, and when it should just be the same. You want to import something into our country, it's 10%. We import something into your country, it's 324%. Oh, hell no. So with the threat of increasing the tariffs from Canada into the United States, able to bring that down to where it's a more equitable level, I think that's a good thing. But the whole thing with China is they do some backdoor stuff. Yeah. But smart. But it's kind of similar because that's forcing China to come into countries to set up manufacturing, which is what the United States has done, which has said basically, kind of like to Korea and other countries, you're going to get taxed and have high tariffs if you send stuff to the United States. But if you come to the United States and open up factories in the United States, you won't have to do that. So a lot of foreign companies are coming back to the United States, and that's going to benefit the country. So, the company will make some money. The United States gets a deal on goods and services and so on and so forth. The economy grows, so it'll be very, very interesting to see how that comes into play. George says, China owns too much farmland in the United States. I haven't looked into that. I've heard that. I haven't verified that. But if they do, I think that's a bad thing. Kind of similar to here in Korea. I think what if, the majority of farmland was owned by a foreign country here in Korea? Yeah, I don't think that's right. George says, China is opening a BYD plant in Canada. Wow. Those vehicles, for those of you who don't know, China has electric vehicles. BYD is one of those companies. Holy crap, those things are incredible. I've been watching some videos on that, and I've seen some BYD vehicles here in Korea, electric vehicles. Oh my gosh, they are top notch. They put Tesla to shame. Honestly, they put Tesla to shame. And yeah, that's just absolutely crazy. Our next vehicle, we've had our vehicle, it's like a 2018, 2019, I think is our Hyundai Sonata. It's got a while to go. We'll use it until it dies or needs a big, massive repair. But our next vehicle is probably going to be an electric vehicle. It's not going to be a Tesla. It'll either be a Korean EV or Chinese electric vehicle. Because what you get in return for your money is just crazy. Crazy stuff. And now with China doing more with battery and energy storage and all that stuff, you're getting increased mileage, whereas on the older vehicles, you wouldn't get as much. I mean, you're talking vehicles that are getting 600 kilometers, 650 kilometers, and they have fast charging that they can do in like 8 or 9 or 10 minutes and get up to almost 100%. Holy crap, that's amazing. Absolutely crazy. Uh, Chinese have always been world class at finding and exploiting loopholes. Yeah, but then a lot of people who are good business people do that as well. And we have a number of politicians in the United States that do the exact same thing, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. So we need to tighten up the loopholes. We need to have term limits. We need to no retirement for politicians, um, Republicans or senators. They should only get the mean salary of the state that they represent. No separate health care. They get health care plans that the normal people cannot sign and get. So all of that stuff. And they shouldn't get a lifelong retirement for just serving one term. All of that needs to go away. And they need to do like a financial thing and say, hey, that if you serve in the government, even if it's just one term, that you cannot receive any foreign monies from any foreign government or lobbyists or big business or pharma or whatever for 25 years. That should be a law. But that's just me. I don't know. George says, they are nice, however. I've had a lot of questions about them. I'm honestly looking forward to taking a trip and going to China and checking it out. Now, granted, it's kind of like Vietnam. Our trip to Vietnam was very, very eye-opening, because Vietnam back in the day. My dad fought in the Korean War or in the Vietnam War. Matter of fact, my grandfather fought in World War II, Korea and Vietnam. But the Vietnam War and that the Vietnamese were bad and the communists were bad, which communism is bad. But the same thing like China, communist Vietnam of back in the day, they too have also adopted, and I think probably about, was it 70s or 80s? Probably around the 70s or 80s, that they started adopting more capitalistic free market ideas as well. China just started doing that in like the 1940s, and they've been adopting more and more free market and capitalism into their form of government. So it's kind of like communism light, with heavy emphasis on capitalism. Vietnam has done the exact same thing. And it's interesting because the number of young people that I've run into that thinks communism is good and socialism is good, they have this preconceived and unfounded idea that if you're communist, you don't have to work. That if you're a communist, you don't have to pay for housing. You don't have to pay for food. That's not the case. I'm sorry to say, but if you're in Vietnam, you just don't get to sit around and, play video games all day. The state has the means of production and real estate and a lot of other stuff. You still need to work. And now, especially the Vietnam and China is more capitalistic, and you still have to work. It's just not, for some strange reason, we don't teach history in school anymore. So maybe that's why the young kids today think that, oh, communism is great, because they have this misconceived idea that they can just sit around and, surf TikTok and Instagram all day, and they don't have to work. You do have to work. You don't work, you don't get paid. A lot of businesses in Vietnam are for-profit businesses. Yeah, you got to get approval from the government, and there's taxes and stuff like that. I think a lot of people would be amazed if they went to Vietnam thinking, yeah, this communist country, I can just sit back and relax and not do anything, do whatever I want and not work. That's not how it is. But we don't teach history in school. So, no wonder they think that stupid. Selden says, the toys, for example, coming out in China are very scary good. I think Hasbro's already thrown in the towel and started licensing some of their IPs to Chinese firms. Interesting. Yeah, they do. They're big on toys and a lot of other things. George says, with restrictions on BYD cars in the United States, they even go on a U.S. base in Korea? Yeah. Why not? It's not the United States. The cars are registered. They still have to get Korean registration, just under the status of forces agreement. service members, family members, contractors, retirees like myself, we can register cars. And since I'm a retiree, I can register my car on post and have access. I register my vehicle. It just has to be owned by me. So it doesn't matter if it's Tesla, Hyundai, Genesis, BYD, some other country, maybe it's a Bugatti. You know, the make of the car doesn't matter as long as I own it or I can show title to that vehicle as the registered owner or driver, and then I can get access to the military base. So, yeah, I've seen lots of cars, foreign cars. It doesn't matter. BYD cars, I can't say I've seen a BYD car, but I'll have to keep an eye out on that. But there is no restriction on cars when you come and register. So onto the military base to get your car registered. I can't see the Japanese like Bandai being able to hold them off much longer. Soon we may see Gundam made in China. Ooh, that's true. That is true. That is true. You got a better system and cheaper products, and the same quality. Why not? It's going to be a thing. So, and that's something else. We're thinking about maybe going to Japan come September for our anniversary. Do like a 2 or a 3 night little thing in Japan. Go from Korea to Japan to celebrate our 37th year, 36 years. 36 years. We've been together 37 for our anniversary. So we're trying to figure out where to go and just do a little trip over to Japan since the exchange rate is still good for that. And then, just kind of see what it's been a long time since I've been to Japan. So yeah, we'll see how this all goes. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So it will be. Alrighty. With that said, yeah, we're going to continue on, and we got some other stuff going on. I'm working on some models, as you can see there, doing some painting, and we're going to continue on doing that stuff. I'm also going to continue working on the paint spray booth that I'm working on. I injured myself. See that little mark there? There's a corresponding mark on the other side where a wire went through all the way through my thumb. And it was like, oh shit. And it went through my thumb and it bent around the bone, which was weird. And it came out the other side and it was, ah! And then I had to get the wire cutter, snip the wire, and then I had to pull the wire out. So yeah, I took some time off from doing the paint spray booth because of that bloody accident. So we've got that going on. Like I said, I've printed out some other stuff like this huge Bowie knife. That's going to be for the Borderlands costume coming up for the end of October. Got some pants I'm going to do. So we're working on that. I just ordered the boots and the gloves for that. So that is going to be interesting. We'll see. Cross your fingers and hopefully those things will come in. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, George says, I can't have an EV. The old wiring in my house can't hold up, and I'd like to be able to fix my car myself. I get it, yeah. George says, ouch. Yes, it was. Sultan says, take care. He's going to go off and do his things. Thanks, brother, for stopping by. I appreciate the insight. And yeah, enjoy yourself. Have some fun. We're going to today's Thursday, so we got some stuff that we need to do. I got food to eat, coffee to drink, and all that. And yeah, just continue on. So for everybody else that is watching, I appreciate it. Thank you for watching and getting involved. For those of you who are lurking in the shadows, feel free to chime in. I would appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. That would help me out, and that would be a good thing. With that, we'll go to this page here. And if you want to contact me, boom, there's my email address. If you want to say hi, show me what you're doing. If there's something that can make me a better painter, printer, person, or you just want to say hi, shoot me an email and I'll answer you back. If you really enjoyed the video, like these people did over here, you could buy me a latte or a coffee. That is in the link down below. But the best thing you could do, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Sultan says, you're still a young man, but you're pushing it. I know. I injured myself. Swedish Forge says, have a good one. You too, sir. And I'll let you know when I get that filament in, because we're going to start printing that. Matter of fact, I'm thinking about getting a bamboo A2L to help in the process of printing out that Spider-Man. Sultan says, got to run back to work in the Lonely Cafe. Lovely cafe. Take care, gang. Have a great one. Maybe one of these days I got to come down and see where you work and get a coffee. That would be something. Okay, that's going to be it. Hey, everybody, have a good one. Retired in Korea. We talked a lot. Enjoy the rest of your week. The weekend is coming, and we will see you on the next video. Peace. Sounds good. Sounds good. Yes, indeedy. Filament's good.